Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation, Future is Now, the ROI of Support Automation. Before we begin, I'd like to review a few housekeeping notes regarding our CPE credit offering today. We are offering 1 credit for today's presentation. We will present 4 polling questions. You need to answer 3 of the 4 polling questions and be present for a viewing time of at least 50 minutes. If you have difficulty with any of the polls, please let us know in chat and we'll be sure you're awarded the credits. And in accordance with the standards of the National Registry of CPE sponsors, CPE credit will be granted on a 50-minute hour. It is now my pleasure to welcome John Dowalter, partner at Baker Tilly. Welcome, John. You're going to introduce our program, and thanks for participating.
Great, thanks, Nancy. Good morning and welcome, everybody. Before we get into today's program, we'll talk just a little bit about some upcoming events, including this week. So starting on Wednesday from 8 to 9, we'll be discussing the estate planning in the Biden tax era as part of the Future is Now programming. That'll be moderated by Derek Weatherford of BMO Private Bank. Also on Wednesday, again in our Future is Now series, we'll be discussing the As a Service Revolution Comes to Disaster Recovery, Modern Data Protection. That's from 9 to 10 a.m. Central, and the speaker for that will be Tim Grosshaus from Atomic Data. In addition, July 14th, the Twin Cities chapter of FEI will be holding its annual meeting from noon to 1, and everybody is invited to that. Registration is now open, so please look for that. And finally, an in-person event, social event at Sociable Cider Works in Northeast Minneapolis on Tuesday, July 20th. Should be a great event. That is from 4:30 until 7. So a number of great things coming up, and hope you're all able to make it. So turning to today's programming with Tim Yeadon, Chief Revenue Officer at Capacity, we'll be discussing the ROI of Support Automation, again in our Future is Now series. Tim, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, John. Good morning, everyone. Give me a minute here to share my screen. It's good to be with you. So as we kick off this morning, some of you might be thinking, support automation, this sure sounds like an IT or customer support topic. How does it apply to me as a finance executive at my company? And what we're seeing is a lot of current market trends that are increasing the adoption of these automation technologies, which we're going to talk about this morning. And the truth is, your IT and support peers are probably already exploring or have purchased these technologies. And so what we want to do this morning is just give you some tools, some questions, to engage in conversations with those other leaders in your organization to make sure that you're getting the value and return on that investment. So at a high level, we're just going to cover 3 things today. We'll talk about those key market trends driving the need and increased adoption for support automation. We'll talk a little bit about what support automation is, what the goals of a support automation platform and program should be. I promise not to get too technical there. I'll give you enough to be informed and maybe even a little bit dangerous in those conversations internally. And then we'll finish up with our ROI categories and considerations. Again, those questions and tools that you can use in those internal conversations. Before we get going, just a little bit of background on me. As John said, I am the Chief Revenue Officer at Capacity. We're based in St. Louis. The company started in 2017. I've been in the enterprise technology space for over 20 years and have been on the software side of technology since 2007. So a lot of the content today is stuff I've used for well over a decade. I've been in the service and support management software space for better than a decade. And so not only am I a practitioner and a consultant in the space, but I'm also a budget holder myself. So as a company, I own the budget lines for several pieces of software automation that we use to run our operations here at Capacity. And so I'm thinking about this every day, not only for customers, but also for us and as how we use and consume software as a company as well. So enough about me. Let's kind of dive into the meat of our program here. And I want to start out with some market trends that I'm very confident all of you are discussing, and these are things that are top of mind for you in your jobs, at your companies, and it just seems to be everywhere. The first trend, kind of macro trend we want to get into is increasing wages and more competition for workers. So I'm going to put up some stats here for call center wages. These are from the Department of Labor. These are actually 2020 numbers. The 2021 numbers are not out yet. What I find interesting is how this number relates to a conversation I recently had with the CEO of an insurance company. So this is a company that has a large claims processing center. They have dozens and dozens and dozens of call center agents that process those claims. And I asked them how they've been doing filling roles, filling vacancies. His company's growing, there's a growing need. And he told me they actually just had to implement about a 10% pay increase to their current employees as well as prospective and incoming employees. And my natural reaction to that was competition. There are other call centers, other roles in that industry that are making it hard for that company to source labor. The truth was, the competition was coming from outside of his industry and outside of those roles, because we're seeing companies from Amazon to Target, even Walmart, increase wages for distribution center workers, retail floor workers, to the point where they were actually seeing attrition in those call centers to these other jobs. People were happy to hang up the headset, kind of leave the cubicle and get to a job that had them on their feet more, interacting with people in person more. And so the competition wasn't for other call center roles, it was for other industries and other roles that previously had not been something they had to think about. So while this is just focused on call center, if we go with technical support roles, HR type of support roles, whoever it is that are the subject matter experts in an organization that answer the questions, handle the requests, the competition for those workers is an all-time high. We also have the trend of workers leaving jobs at the highest rate in 2 decades. This is from a Wall Street Journal article that I think a lot of folks have been talking about the last couple of weeks. Voluntary turnover is just at an all-time high, regardless of industry, regardless of role. And a lot of this is tied to the COVID pandemic and some work from home habits and practices that were formed. While people were working from home, they explored other options, side jobs, and they're finding other ways to make incomes where maybe they can be their own boss, or it does not require them to return to the office if and when that occurs for their companies. So not only do we have increasing wages, not only do we have higher competition for workers, but we have more workers who are choosing voluntarily to leave the workforce. And then finally, kind of playing off that previous trend, we obviously have all been experiencing and talking about work from home, what seems like forever now, but we're seeing just more competition again from new sources that we aren't used to before. We're also seeing an interesting trend where companies who have said they're going to remain remote are hiring workers outside of their near geography. So I'm based here in St. Louis. Most of you or all of you are based in the Minnesota area. You may see companies from the coast coming in to recruit, some may say poach workers from these markets. And what this affords employees to do is remain at home, but also potentially make more from a company based in a higher cost market while they remain in their lower cost market. So in summary, our workloads continue to either stay the same or increase, but the availability of workers to do that work is decreasing. The next grouping, second grouping of macro trends is just evolving behavior and expectations for both our customers and our employees. Now, I would say most of these trends predate anything with the COVID pandemic, but I think they've been exacerbated or accelerated during the COVID pandemic. So if we focus on customers, while we might not think of it this way, your customers are comparing you to the experiences they get from leading companies like Amazon and Netflix. Fill in the blank here with whoever you think is an experiential leader in customer service. You're being compared to those companies. Customers want self-service, meaning they want to go find answers to their questions on their own. They want omni-channel support, whether it be on a phone, a tablet, laptop, however it might be. They want to be able to talk to people. If self-service isn't working, they want to be escalated seamlessly to a subject matter expert who can answer their question and get their issue resolved as quickly as possible. And just above all else, we have been trained for speed and convenience in this world. Patience is not a value or a habit most of us have been forming. And so we just need to think about that as we provide support to our customers. And it's actually very similar on the employee support side of things as well. Again, while it might seem odd, we are being compared to those consumer experiences from the Amazons and the Netflix. Plus, we have to keep an eye on everything that competitors and other companies are publishing on LinkedIn and Glassdoor about how they support their employees, how they engage their employees. Employees also want to work on valuable projects, valuable tasks. This idea that we can bring people in and have them work on the same repetitive tasks over and over again is something, a trend that has been happening for the last few years. People want to work on valuable tasks. They want to use their brains at work. They don't want to be rinsing and repeating the same tasks over and over. So as we think about these trends, we also need to consider that our two biggest groups of brand ambassadors have expectations that are constantly and consistently evolving that we need to keep up with. And this is why this topic of automated support has been very prevalent in the IT, customer support domains for a couple of years, and we're starting to see it catch on in other domains like HR. So good time to pause here for our first poll question. And that is simply, which of these market trends do you feel is having the biggest impact on your company today? Is it increasing wages, more competition for workers, evolving customer behaviors, or those involving employee behaviors? Go ahead and submit your answer, and I will pause here and let you do that. All right, now that we've talked a little bit about these behaviors, and we can see on the screen here, more competition for workers edges out the other three, but it looks like these are top of mind for everyone, right? So across the board, we see pretty even distribution of these trends. And I think it's just going to continue. I think we can all agree it's going to continue throughout 2021 and into the future. So now that we've talked a little bit about which trends are having the biggest impact, let's talk about support automation, what it is, and how it's really becoming a bigger part of the conversation in reaction and response to these trends. Again, we have the same or an increasing amount of work, and we have fewer workers to do it, which is often the time when companies turn to technology for answers. So let's start out here with some simple definitions of what is support automation. Super simple definition. Support automation is the use of technology to simplify how customers' employees receive help and information. Remember from the previous slide, people want speed and convenience. So support automation is really focused on providing that speed and convenience and minimizing the need for human interaction throughout as a way and a means of providing reliable self-service. Now, interestingly, if support automation is a newer term for you, or it feels like a term you've heard, but you're not sure where, it's actually an umbrella category of technology. If you think about support automation, it's made up of several categories of software that you're probably familiar with or your company owns or is exploring today. So when we think about our help desks and service desks, when we think about our CRM software, when we think about process and workflow automation, robotic process automation or RPA, and then technologies that have been around a little bit longer like OCR. All of these technologies represent subcategories of the umbrella category of support automation. Now, what support automation really tries to do is connect all these, can be disparate systems together in one extensible platform. And it extends the utility of that platform by incorporating more modern technologies like artificial intelligence, natural language processing, and machine learning. And that's really, in the recent couple of years, what's unlocked the potential in ROI of support automation are these modern technologies. So again, I promise not to get too technical on you, but I just want to go through these concepts at a high level, kind of to demystify what they are, to simplify kind of the definitions of these terms, and what we're really talking about when we talk about AI, natural language processing, and machine learning. So, simple definition of AI, it's software that is capable of learning and completing human tasks, okay? And so the promise of AI is that with usage, with every question, inquiry, request that it handles, the utility of the software grows, but differently, over time, the system is capable of getting smarter. Very simple illustration. If we, on our x-axis, consider the learning or the brain of the AI, y-axis as the time and usage of that AI, what we see is growth of the learning over time. And you see the curve gets steeper over time. It's one thing, one of the values and great promises of AI is once you start to teach it a little bit and it starts to make those connections faster and faster and faster than a human can. Now, the real value here is the more AI can take on, the less human intervention is required. And AI is a really, really good technology for repetitive questions and requests that we get in our common support use cases, whether that be through customer service, IT support, HR support, et cetera. So again, simple definition of artificial intelligence. The next one is natural language processing. Natural language processing is what allows computers, in simple terms, to understand human speech, right? It allows us to type or speak to an automated bot or computer, and that bot to really be able to decipher the intent and understand the context of the question that is being submitted. And good modern NLP can handle all the typos and acronyms and variants of different questions and move it forward in the process. So simple example here is a breakdown of a sentence that might be asked in a financial services company. A good modern NLP can break down what's an acronym. Okay, that's a spelling error. I really know what the intent here is, with the different entity types and where to go for the sources of information. Natural language processing is very, very important for any support automation solution because it's what ensures a viable customer experience. We all know what a non-viable customer experience is, where we get really frustrated with our Siri or Alexa because we're asking what we think is a very simple question, and it's responding back with, I don't understand, or I can't find that answer for you. Well, that doesn't work in a commercial context, right? That's a bad customer experience. So modern NLP is what gets us over the hurdle of AIs not being able to understand what we're asking or what we're looking for. And the final concept, which often can be the most confusing and complex, so I'm going to keep it at a pretty high level, is machine learning. Machine learning is essentially the ability to automatically improve the performance of artificial intelligence systems by processing large quantities of data and incorporating real-time user feedback. So machine learning is a subset of artificial intelligence. And a really simple example is this user feedback. As users are interacting with our system and telling us through intents or other analysis how things are going, machine learning can process all that data across hundreds of thousands of users and actually feed that back to AI engines in real time to make small improvements in how the AI is performing. That's just a very, very simple definition of machine learning within this context. But you can see how it's very important if we're going back to my graph 2 slides ago, if we're gonna improve the learning and utility of our AI machines, we need machine learning to process that data, quantify it, and make those improvements. So, talked a little bit about the concepts of support automation. What are we looking for support automation platforms to deliver? The key concept here is really the ability for these platforms to deflect work before it happens, meaning deflect work before it needs to go to our team members. If we're having a harder time staffing roles and our workloads are growing, but our teams are not, we need a meaningful, reliable way to deflect that work before it comes into our team. And that's what these support automation platforms are able to do while still creating a good, engaging customer experience or employee experience. This really plays itself out in that it can drastically reduce the number of emails we get, the number of phone calls we get, the number of tickets that are being handed or being entered into our help desk. It's those shoulder taps and interruptions throughout the day that we're all very familiar with. That's where support automation platforms come in and can really, again, deflect that work before it gets to you. It also can reduce the time spent on repetitive tasks and eliminate bottlenecks in our processes. So I talked about it a few slides ago. The days of employees coming in every day and working on repetitive tasks are going to become more and more a thing of the past. It's going to create a huge retention problem for people to come in day after day doing the same things over and over again. That's where we should engage technology. That's where we should engage automation. So our people, our team members can focus on the more complicated, challenging tasks, those that need human interaction. And then also, most bottlenecks in our processes are due to the availability or the bandwidth of our team members, right? It's waiting on that approval. It's waiting on that piece of information, whatever it might be. If we create the platform that is connected to all of our data and systems throughout our enterprise, the platform can go find that information and bring it back and complete it in that process, thus eliminating those process bottlenecks. And I think the final key here, and it's something I just mentioned, we have to think about this as a platform, not an individual confederation of tools and point solutions. We need to connect all these things end to end so we can move that data effectively around our organization. That's really where we really start to unlock the return on investment for these types of solutions and platforms. It's connecting your entire tech stack to ensure that flow of data. So again, let's do our next poll question. This is poll question 2 out of 4. In the next 12 to 24 months, which factor do you think will disrupt your internal teams the most? Do you think it'll be team growth? So just increased need to support more employees, new employees, customer growth, same idea, but it's because you expect your customer numbers to expand. Maybe you're rolling out a new business application or system. I was talking to a customer the other day that's rolling out a huge HR system that they expect to be very disruptive to their employees. Maybe you're introducing a new product or service, or perhaps you're a company that is expecting, anticipating, or continuing some M&A activity. Which of these do you think will disrupt your teams most? All right, survey says, interesting. Rolling out a new business application or system seems to be the clear winner here. So as I mentioned, I've been in the software space for a while, in the enterprise technology space as well. And I've been a part of large application system rollouts. I remember early in my career when ERP was really starting to emerge, I was a part of an ERP rollout at a fairly large company. I was part of that project team. And boy, it certainly was disruptive. Now, that was back in the good old days of 2002 or 2003, where rolling out ERP was really hard. They were on-prem systems. But there is no doubt that rolling out software, rolling out systems, applications can be very disruptive. And I'm glad that is a leading factor, because we're going to talk about that a little bit later as we start talking about ROI and really the costs side of the ROI equation. So with that, let's really kind of jump into the main course here of the presentation, and that is, how do we think, or how should we be thinking about return on investment for these software platforms? So let me first say, you're all financial executives, you know how to calculate an ROI. I want to really bring you a practitioner's perspective of how to think about ROI, very specifically for software and very specifically for modern platforms in the support space. As you start to think about some of the concepts we've talked about, artificial intelligence, et cetera, how should we really be thinking about that in 2021 versus how we might have looked at that 2 or 5 or 10 years ago? So let's start on the cost side of the equation. So what are we going to have to kind of put into the middle here to get a gain on that investment? So I think, keep it simple. While there are several categories, we're going to focus on what I feel are the 4 primary cost categories when we look at purchasing and adopting a new technology. The first is the actual software licensing costs. Second is the cost to implement. Then there is the cost to support ongoing. And then this thing around loss of productivity, so training, change management. This goes back to our last survey question, where several of you said that the loss of productivity, I'm guessing, is what will disrupt your team members the most as you look to implement new software and systems. So let's unpack each of these a little bit more. Licensing costs. So my first encouragement, knowing that we're in support automation is an umbrella category that's made up of several subcategories, you really do need to work with your counterparts, and whether it's IT, customer support, HR, operations, et cetera, to define a long-term plan. If you piecemeal this together in a reactionary way, you're going to overspend, and you're also going to have a hard time understanding what is the anticipated ROI or value each of these systems brings. I mentioned I'm the budget line holder for, I think, 6 different platforms here. We've been really intentional about defining how all those fit together, and on an annual basis, we review exactly what those are, what the anticipated renewal prices are, and should we be looking at replacements or different ways, different software packages that can do the same thing. Along with that, this is a kind of an obvious statement, but we often miss it. We wait to define the metrics and ROI after we start, and we all know we should do that before we even get the contract really into purchasing, right? So as part of our internal business case, what are those key metrics? What is the anticipated ROI? We're going to send this presentation out afterwards, and I've got some links to resources where you can reference some of the key metrics that your team should be focused on, or they're already focused on. And then we'll get into some ROI calculations here a little bit later. But again, the encouragement here is to do this before we get started instead of in a reactionary manner afterwards. We should be holding regular reviews with key internal stakeholders. I think quarterly is appropriate. Some might do monthly, some might do semi-annually. I think annually is too spread out. To me, I prefer quarterly, just to make sure we're bringing all the responsible parties together. The people or the teams that made the purchase, the budget holders, and really asking the hard questions. How are we doing on those key metrics? And are we capturing the actual ROI based on the anticipated ROI? And then here's one. I'm a vendor, and I'm always happy to have this conversation. I think you've got to gain commitment from your vendors and your software partners to have some skin in the game and to participate in those reviews. We very much look forward to doing quarterly reviews with our customers. Some want to do it on a semi-annual basis, which is fine. But to have skin in the game, in some cases, have key metrics called out in contracts, maybe having SLAs associated with them. I think if you're spending 6 or 7 figures on a piece of software, you should absolutely have those negotiated into a contract. If it's a smaller investment, a smaller kind of piece of software impact-wise, I think you can agree to those kind of on paper and review those, but you should be looking to partner with your external vendors and partners kind of on your journey here, and they should see themselves as shoulder to shoulder with you, trying to measure and actually review what the ROI you're receiving from their products. So that's a little bit on licensing costs. Implementation costs, we've got to really clearly define roles and responsibilities, who is doing what. Specifically, who internally is responsible for implementation success and timeline. I would not outsource that role. I know that in some software implementations, there's great partners out there. That goes back to roles and responsibilities. What are our internal teams doing? What is the provider of the software doing? And if there's a third-party implementation company involved, what are they doing? I worked for one of those third-party implementation service companies for many years. And we always talked about bringing sort of the 3 legs of the stool together, us, the customer, and the software provider. Really clearly defining upfront who's doing what, but who is the direct responsible individual, the DRI, for implementation success and timeline, and that's who is helping to own and ensure the ROI reviews as we get further along in the process. Going back to a previous point, are you better off trying to implement this yourself or outsourcing the implementation of the software? I can tell you, you have a really hard time convincing me that our teams implementing other people's software is a good idea. And I would ask you to challenge your teams on that as well. If you don't make the software or you don't specialize in implementing the software, it's going to take longer and be more costly and more expensive. A lot of times what we see is customers or companies, I should say, try to take it on themselves, only to then bring in a third party or the software provider to supplement and take over the implementation. So count the costs up front of what it looks like to deploy software yourself versus bring in external experts. And then this all goes to, do you have not only the required skills on staff, but enough of the required skills on staff? And then is there a proven and repeatable implementation process out there? If there is, right, if there are playbooks and guides and you're using software that has a long history of being self-implemented, go for it. But if a provider or vendor can't show you that, then that's the number one sign. You should be looking to them or someone in their network and approved partner to do that implementation for you. And then again, one that might seem obvious, but we think still see folks miss quite a bit is the software cloud-based or on-premise? Some of you work in industries that still are highly regulated, high degree of compliance management, and therefore there is still on-premise software requirements. And there are some technologies out there like RPA, that's robotic process automation, which is great technology, but in a lot of cases it does run on-premise versus in the cloud. And the infrastructure investments and the support investment can be very, very expensive on an ongoing basis. So while cloud is by far the primary delivery methodology out there, there's no doubt that every once in a while you'll run into an on-prem system. And likewise, as you're doing renewals or reviewing legacy software, does it still need to run on-prem? Is there a path to the cloud that can be done in a cost-effective manner? Because as we get into support costs here, it can really improve that ROI calculation by pivoting to the cloud. All right, let's move on to support costs. We're implemented. Now we have to run and maintain and support the software long-term. In other words, we have the keys to the car and we've got to drive and maintain that car, get the oil changed, et cetera. So again, I'm starting where I just left off. Is the software cloud or on-prem? Just a huge variance in cost structures over the life of a contract, depending on what the answer is. And again, encourage you to ask your software owners, if you have legacy on-prem systems, do they have to continue to run on-prem? And if it does, what does the infrastructure investment look like? And how many people need to maintain that? When we talk about infrastructure and we talk about servers and things of that nature, they have to be maintained, they have to be monitored, they have to add disk space, memory space, all these types of things. how many people does it require to do that? I was in a conversation not too long ago with a large financial services company. They'd done a really big enterprise automation deployment, but it was on-prem, and they had 5 full-time ops people that were just maintaining the infrastructure for the on-prem system. So it's just something to think about. Now that can work out in your ROI calculation if you plan for it up front. What skills are required to manage the software? So do we need system administrators? Do we need people to train people day to day on being in the system and how to use it? I bet you those of you who chose or selected the implementation or rollout of a new system or application as being highly disruptive over the last 12 to 24 months, the training on the people required to manage the software is probably a huge factor in that, right? And so we just need to think about the skills we need up front. And again, going back to the labor market, it is very hard to find specific skill groups out in the market right now. Maybe you're looking for a Salesforce admin. Maybe you're looking for someone to run your marketing automation stack, or database administrators, whatever it might be. I can tell you from firsthand experience, it's very, very hard to find those resources right now, and they are very, very expensive. In some cases, 25 or 30% cost-wise over what they were a year ago. And then not only what skills, but how many team members are going to be involved in this? It's a simple question, but it's one that's often difficult to answer. And so this is when reference calls become very, very important before you select a vendor. Ask to talk to someone of similar size and say, hey, how many people in your organization are involved with using and managing this software? Last category is loss of productivity. Look, modern software that's deployed on the cloud that uses artificial intelligence, natural language processing, and machine learning, any loss of productivity should be very minimal and short-lived. The days of 12 to 24 month software implementation should be in the rearview mirror. So just something to consider. Again, talk to customers who are using the software to confirm how long that loss of productivity is. These modern platforms should be very intuitive and easy to use. I remember sitting through weeks-long training when we rolled out that ERP 18 years ago. That should not be a requirement anymore. To me, that is a warning sign if anyone is telling you that we need people to be going through training a week at a time. And you need to be able to show your team members how any new system is going to improve their work life, right? That's how you not only minimize any loss of productivity related to change management, because people get nervous or anxious about adopting a new system and losing maybe a system they're very familiar with, but it's actually a way to gain excitement and enthusiasm about moving to a new system. All right, so we've talked a little bit about the costs. Let's talk a little bit about the gain, and then we'll jump into an ROI calculation to wrap things up before our kind of final poll question and open Q&A session. So gain on investment. Primary categories, again, I've selected 4 categories here. First is what software are we replacing? The second is where are we saving on labor? The next is where do we anticipate increased throughput that could have a nice impact on either our costs or our revenue? And then where can we pick up experience improvements? All right, so software replacement, this should be the easiest to calculate and confirm. If you remember, in support automation, we've got 5 or 6 subcategories. So we should be checking some software off the list in replacing some legacy capabilities. So simply put, what software costs will come off the books? And the associated service, support, and infrastructure costs with those. For example, if we're replacing a legacy system that runs on-prem, we should be able to retire, amortize, all that good stuff, the infrastructure it runs on. Understand if there is any overlap that will require you to run both systems or pay for both systems at a time. So let's say you're replacing your help desk for your customer support team. You might be paying for your new help desk as you implement it while you are retiring and moving off your old help desk. Work with your vendor partners to negotiate it so that overlapping period is short as possible. because there's nothing worse. There's two things that drive me nuts. One, when software doesn't get used, talk about that in a minute, and two, paying for two systems that do the same thing for any period of time. So be sure to think about that. Labor savings. So I think AI and automation gets a bad rap as kind of job stealers, and that's not really what we're looking to accomplish here. Focus more on improving your control over your FTE growth than FTE reduction. In other words, focus on doing more with the folks and the team you have versus having to grow that team over time. You shouldn't have to add a team member every time you add a customer, every time you do an acquisition, so on and so forth. Automation and these modern platforms should help you offset some of that increased work. Understand your actual cost per support channel. So this is a big one. And I have to say, I think most companies ballpark this, but they don't take the time to really uncover how much they are truly paying, and nor are they monitoring how much they're paying per support channel. So these are industry average numbers. Again, the sources and resources will be included when we send out this deck, but you can see here on average, when someone makes a phone call to your support team, costs you, most organizations on average, about $18, emails about $15, and then a live chat session is about $12. Now, these numbers are probably about 12 months old. So if we know the price of the people on the other end of these support channels is going up, we can assume the price of each of these channels has risen with it. So I think taking the time to really understand the volumes you get in each channel, it's key to calculating the actual labor savings and therefore cost savings you will get from an investment in support automation. Said differently, I think the only clear-cut hard ROI you can get without this is software replacement costs. So if you really want to understand the full impact from an ROI standpoint, you have to understand these costs for each support channel. We have some customers, just to brag on ourselves for a little bit, who our system is less than 75 cents per interaction when they look at their agreement on an annual basis and the number of questions we can deflect in others. We are a support automation platform. There are others out there. I want to be neutral here, but I just want to say that these automation platforms have drastically better economics than any human-based support channels do. The last category before we kind of get into our calculation is throughput improvement. This can be the absolute hardest one to calculate. Actually, I think this is our second to last category, but what processes can you execute faster that may have a viable financial impact? I'll give you an example. We work a lot with mortgage lenders, obviously an industry that's been very busy the last couple of years. And mortgages, as you all know, come with a lot of documents. And these lenders have teams of people that process those documents often manually. So they bring in a document and they might be manually keying in data off that document. Well, you can use automation platforms like ours and others to automatically extract data off documents. Therefore, you are able to process more documents. You have less people focused on the extraction of those documents. Instead, they're in a quality assurance role. They're looking for exceptions, documents missing information. It improves that throughput, and therefore, you're able to get more loans in your pipeline, et cetera. Another example is just simple administrative tasks like employee onboarding and offboarding. That's something that we often dedicate HR resources to. We're doing it on a daily basis, but there's just a lot of administrative tasks, sending emails, sending reminders, letting IT know what they need to do, letting facilities know what their tasks are, et cetera. A lot of that can be facilitated and automated via process automation. And while that's a softer dollar ROI, I do think we can intelligently assume that if we're lifting those administrative tasks, those repetitive tasks off our team members' plates, they are spending time on more strategic tasks that are more likely to have a positive impact on either our top or bottom line. And then finally, and we'll just touch on this briefly, is experience improvements. Depending on the industry you're in, you may or may not be able to come up with some hard dollar calculations here. We have net promoter scores, customer sat scores, employee sat scores. I'm just putting up these stats to say these things matter. These things are important. They absolutely have an impact on the financials of every company, but specifically those in hospitality, retail, e-commerce, et cetera. So, just quick definitions for those who are not as familiar. Net promoter, likelihood a customer is to recommend your product or service to a friend or colleague. Customer sat, how happy are they with you and the service you're providing, which is a great sense of or source of retention. And then employee satisfaction, again, all about retention. Where do we have potential issues or turnover issues emerging? All right, so next poll question. I really want to go through a quick ROI kind of calculation here to wrap up here with our last few minutes. So to the best of your ability, let's just focus on internal employee support requests, right? Requests to IT, maybe to finance, legal, HR. How many employee support requests do you think your company averages per month? And we provide some basic ranges here. And if you're brave enough to say, I have no idea, that's okay. But give us a sense here of what you think it is. Survey says, looks like actually pretty good distribution. Looks like we have one real large company here with more than 5,000. I'm very proud of everyone for at least having a ballpark guess. But we can see here we have a pretty good distribution. So why is this important? Why do these numbers matter? Well, it's our best way to really get a good understanding, in addition to software replacement costs. It's a really good way for us to understand exactly what we can expect to save and how we can expect to profit for an investment in a modern support automation platform. So really simple calculator here, really simple calculations. If we know the support channels we use, if we know the volume for each of those support channels, and we know our average cost for each of those support channels, whether it's on a per incident or even an annual basis, we can come up pretty quickly, pretty simply with a good monthly cost here. So here we just took an average of 2,000. We're saying half coming from email. By the way, email is still by far out in the industry the most used support channel, especially for employee support. Some industry estimates say it's still 80% of our support volumes come in via email. So here we chose 50%, and we multiply those by our cost structures. We come up with a monthly support cost, which we can then annualize. Now, here's the key. We can go through on the bottom here and we can say, what percentage of these inquiries can we assume we can hand off to support automation platforms, to these self-service platforms? I would say 30% is extremely conservative. I would be disappointed if a customer came back to me and said, Tim, we were only able to deflect 30% through your platform. I think 50% is probably the most conservative I would go. I think 70% based on what we've seen over our 4 years of doing this is very, very reasonable. And so when we think about the reduction self-service creates in the table above, we can come up with our average support cost savings. And then we can add in our implementation, our software costs, our implementation costs, our support costs to really get to a true understanding of the ROI. And going all the way back to an earlier slide, remember, the more these systems get used, the more departments who use them, the more work we're deflecting, right? The higher the utility gets. And so the more we can deflect here, the better the value is to us as a company, which is why we shouldn't just look at rolling out these platforms in a department. we should look at rolling them out enterprise-wide, because that's ultimately what's going to get us the most utility, the best ROI, and therefore the best bang for our buck over time. All right, that concludes the formal part. Boy, right at 8:50. I think we have a few minutes here for Q&A. Again, we will send this out afterwards, but I'll pause here. And Nancy, I think you will let me know if we have any questions.
I don't have any questions at this point, Tim. I have asked the group to put their questions into the Q&A or the chat box, and I just have one on CPE. So we'll wait to see if anybody has any more questions. I do have one final poll to deploy, and that would be to see if you folks all need more information. I'll put that up now while we're waiting for anybody to formalize a question.
And on the screen also are the resources that will be included when we send these out afterwards. So you can kind of dig into some of the numbers here. And then my contact information will be included as well if there are any kind of detailed scenarios you would like any input on. I might have cut someone off there. Any questions?
Not yet. There's a.
Oh, I think I see one from.
Oh, there we go. Yes,
yep.
Correct.
All right, so Brent, thanks for the question. Is there any type of NPS used for the automated supports? How do you measure, quantify the quality of interactions? Yes, really great question. So there's a couple of ways that we look at this, and those our peers in the industry look at this. First is sentiment analysis. So a user will tell you, as we all know, a user will tell you pretty quickly if they're getting frustrated. They will indicate pretty quickly if they're getting frustrated. People are not afraid if they're interacting with an AI system, a chatbot, whatever it is. They're not afraid to throw down a little profanity. They're not afraid to say, I'm really frustrated, this experience stinks, etc. That's where machine learning can come in to process some of that sentiment analysis and tell us how we're doing in the analytics. The other thing we do, and other companies do, is we provide real-time user feedback mechanisms, things like thumbs up, thumbs down that are clickable, follow-up questions, did that answer your question, pulse surveys, how satisfied have you been with this experience or in working with this tool, those types of things. And so we can really capture all that data. And then what we offer the ability to do, which we think is smart, if someone does give negative feedback, we provide the ability for them to connect with a team member instantly right there, instead of waiting for someone to follow up with them or waiting someone to kind of read the data whenever they get around to it. So I think that seamless real-time escalation is another really important way of measuring these things. We do have some customers in banking who measure NPS very closely. They measure the sentiment analysis very closely, and they've seen a bump in NPS through using some of these automated support means, just because they don't have a very big call center, and their call wait times can be very, very long, and people don't want to have to go into their local branch to get an answer to their question. So again, industry-specific use case, but you do see some interesting use cases out there on NPS. But you're right, it can cause frustration, Brent. There's no doubt about it. It frustrates me when I see bad experiences with our platform. All right, Nancy, anything else on poll question, the polling, or any other questions that we need to hit before we wrap up?
No, I think we are at the end of our program. Thank you very much, Tim, for all your thought, knowledge, and sharing with our finance executives. Very insightful. Folks, again, we will have this recording posted on the YouTube should you like to refer to it again, or if you wish to share it with a colleague, feel free to do that. We are about 5 minutes out from the end of the program, but that gives you 5 minutes for a cup of coffee. And you have met the 50-minute required minutes for CPE, and we do thank everyone for their attention. Tim, thank you again for presenting, and this does end the webinar. Wishing you the best of the morning. Bye.